There are moments when something that was once hidden is finally brought into the light, and instead of relief, what follows is silence. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that feels unfamiliar. After the exposure, after the recognition, many people expect an immediate sense of resolution. But what often comes next is something quieter, deeper, and more structural. This is where the real shift begins. When an ancestral wound is exposed, it does not vanish instantly. Exposure is not destruction, it is separation. It is the moment when something that once operated in the background can no longer pretend to be part of you. And yet, its influence may still linger, not because it is strong, but because it has been present for a long time. What followed you for years did not survive by force alone, it survived through familiarity. In this space, we are not confronting what was exposed. We are not revisiting it. We are not fighting it. We are doing something far more decisive. We are remaining outside its reach. Many people misunderstand healing at this stage. They believe they must continue addressing the wound, revisiting the past, or naming what has already been revealed. But there comes a point where attention itself becomes nourishment, and what was exposed no longer needs to be fed. This is not the stage of confrontation. This is the stage of withdrawal. The unseen influence begins to weaken, not because it is attacked, but because it no longer has access. Access was always the source of its endurance. Familiar thoughts, emotional reflexes, inherited responses, these were the entry points. And when those entry points close, pressure begins to dissolve on its own. Psalm 91 speaks directly to this state, not as a promise of dramatic rescue, but as a description of environment, a dwelling place, a position where protection is not something you request, but something you remain within. At this stage, nothing needs to be activated, nothing needs to be declared, nothing needs to be proven. The shift happens through stillness. As the mind slows, something subtle occurs. The nervous system begins to recognize safety, not excitement, not relief, safety. And safety is deeply disruptive to anything that relies on tension to survive. What followed you for years was never sustained by power alone. It was sustained by pressure, and pressure cannot remain where rest is continuous. This is why the change feels quiet, no explosion, no emotional peak, no moment you can point to and say, this is when it happened. Instead, there is a gradual realization. Something that once felt constant is no longer present in the same way. Thoughts lose their urgency. Emotional reactions soften. Old patterns feel distant, as if they belong to someone else's story. Psalm 109 speaks to the unraveling of what was sent, spoken, or inherited against a person. But unraveling does not always look like reversal. Sometimes it looks like irrelevance. The wound does not need to be defeated. It simply loses its position. And Psalm 27 reinforces what replaces it. Quiet confidence, steady presence, unshaken orientation. Not dominance, not aggression, stability. This is how cycles truly end, not with a dramatic moment, but with continuity that no longer includes them. If you are listening now and sensing a calm that feels unfamiliar, do not rush to interpret it. Do not search for signs. Do not question whether something is happening. The absence of pressure is itself the evidence. Remain here. Let the space settle. Let the body recognize the difference between tension and peace. What followed you for years cannot survive where it is no longer acknowledged as necessary. This is not the end of the process. It is the new environment. And as you remain within it, what once operated unseen will continue to weaken, quietly, inevitably, and without resistance. If this space resonates with you, there are other moments within this channel designed to deepen this state of protection and rest. They are not meant to replace this experience, but to extend it. Remain where you are. Let the silence work. Let the refuge hold. There is a moment, often overlooked, when the body realizes before the mind that something has changed. Not because something new arrived, but because something old stopped insisting. This is the quiet aftermath of exposure, when the system no longer reacts the way it once did, even though nothing obvious was done. Many people wait for confirmation. They wait for a feeling strong enough to convince them that the process is real. But this kind of shift does not announce itself. It integrates. What once followed you did not disappear because it was confronted. It began to fade because it was no longer needed to explain your inner state. The mind no longer organizes itself around that weight. The body no longer braces for it. And when anticipation ends, influence ends with it. This is why the experience feels subtle but irreversible. Pressure requires participation. It needs the nervous system to stay alert, the thoughts to stay engaged, the inner world to remain reactive. When rest becomes continuous, pressure loses its leverage. Not suddenly, but completely. Psalm 91 describes protection as a dwelling, not an intervention. It is not something that turns on and off. It is something that surrounds. And when you remain within it long enough, it recalibrates what your system considers normal. This recalibration is the true break. Old cycles do not end because they are named. They end because the environment that sustained them no longer exists. The same thoughts may appear, but they carry no urgency. The same memories may surface, but they no longer define direction. This is how inherited patterns dissolve, not through effort but through displacement. What was once central becomes peripheral. What was once loud becomes distant. What was once familiar feels foreign. There is no need to measure progress here. Measurement pulls attention back to the thing that is already losing relevance. The absence of struggle is the signal. The lack of urgency is the confirmation. As you continue listening, allow the body to remain exactly as it is. No posture needs to be corrected. No breath needs to be controlled. Stillness is not something to achieve. It is something to stop interrupting. In this space, authority returns quietly. Not the authority of control, but the authority of alignment. The kind that does not argue, explain, or defend itself. It simply stands, and nothing unnecessary can remain in its presence for long. Psalm 27 speaks of confidence that does not depend on outcome. It describes a steadiness that exists before circumstances shift. This is the kind of confidence that cannot be shaken because it is not waiting for permission. When protection becomes an environment, fear no longer has a function. It may appear briefly, out of habit, but it finds nothing to attach to. And without attachment, it fades. This is why the process feels ongoing rather than finished. The effect does not conclude, it stabilizes. If you notice moments of quiet throughout your day that feel different than before, do not analyze them. These are not gaps to be filled. They are signs that something that once occupied space no longer does. The system is learning a new baseline, and what followed you for years cannot survive in a baseline that no longer includes tension. Remain here as long as you need. There is no next step to prepare for, no action required. This is not a moment to be used. It is a state to be inhabited. As the video continues, the words may become less distinct. That is intentional. They are not meant to demand attention, only to support presence. Let them fade into the background as the sense of safety remains. What matters is not what you understand, but what no longer presses against you. And as this quiet authority settles, the unraveling continues, steadily, silently, and without resistance. Over time, something important happens without being noticed at first. The mind stops scanning for danger. Not because danger was eliminated, but because vigilance is no longer required. This is one of the clearest signs that an unseen pressure has lost its authority. For a long time, the inner system learned to stay alert. It learned to anticipate disruption, emotional weight, or inner resistance. That anticipation became normal, familiar. Even when nothing was happening, the body remained prepared. When that preparation ends, the change can feel almost confusing. Some people mistake this calm for emptiness. Others wonder if they are missing something, but what they are experiencing is the absence of interference. The system is no longer being pulled in multiple directions at once. This is not numbness, this is coherence. The presence you are entering does not demand awareness. It does not require effort to maintain. It sustains itself because it is aligned with rest rather than reaction. Psalm 91 does not describe protection as something fragile. It describes it as something stable enough to dwell within, a place where nothing needs to be negotiated internally. When you remain here long enough, your inner world stops asking questions that were never meant to be answered. Why did this follow me? Why did it last so long? Why did it feel inherited rather than chosen? These questions dissolve because they no longer serve a purpose. Understanding is replaced by orientation, and orientation is far more powerful than explanation. What was operating unseen did not require your belief to exist. And now that it is weakening, it does not require your attention to disappear. Attention is no longer the currency here. Stillness is. As minutes pass, the body continues to recalibrate. Muscles that were unconsciously tense begin to soften. Breathing becomes deeper without instruction. The nervous system recognizes that it no longer needs to hold the past in place. This release is structural. Nothing dramatic marks it. No emotional release signals it. It shows itself in neutrality, in the way your thoughts no longer spiral, in the way inner dialogue quiets without being silenced. This is why the experience works best over long listening. Time itself becomes part of the process. The longer you remain, the more the old pressure loses relevance. Psalm 70 carries a quiet urgency, but not the kind that rushes. It is the urgency of alignment, the kind that removes delay without creating force. It supports the transition from endurance to ease. Ease does not mean weakness. Ease means friction has been removed. When friction ends, movement becomes natural. But here, movement is not required. What is required is remaining. The environment does the work. If you notice moments where your attention drifts, allow it. There is no penalty for wandering here. The experience does not rely on focus. It relies on exposure, not to intensity, but to safety. Safety is transformative. Many patterns survive only because the inner world never experienced consistent safety. Once safety becomes familiar, the system no longer organizes itself around survival. And what followed you for years was deeply tied to survival patterns that no longer apply. This is why the shift continues even when you are not consciously thinking about it. The unraveling does not pause when the video ends. It proceeds because the baseline has changed. As you continue listening, you may sense moments where nothing seems to be happening at all. These moments are not empty, they are integration points. This is where the deepest changes settle. Do not fill them. Let the quiet remain uninterrupted. Authority grows here, not as a feeling of control, but as the absence of inner opposition. The parts of you that once resisted rest are no longer active. They have nothing to respond to. Psalm 27 speaks of confidence that exists before the threat is removed. This confidence is not optimism, it is groundedness, the kind that remains even when circumstances are unclear. And that groundedness is becoming familiar now. You are not moving towards something, you are no longer being pulled backward. This balance is the foundation of lasting peace. Stay within it. As the minutes extend, something subtle but decisive continues to take place. The inner world no longer reacts to silence as if it were a problem to solve. Silence becomes neutral, then familiar, then supportive. This is a critical shift. For a long time, silence may have felt uncomfortable. It may have invited old thoughts, old tensions, or a sense that something was missing. But now, silence does not invite anything. It simply exists, and nothing rises to challenge it. This is how unseen pressure finally loses its footing. Pressure depends on movement. It depends on reaction, anticipation, and internal noise. When none of those are present, it has no way to sustain itself. It cannot attach, it cannot repeat, it cannot convince. What followed you for years learned to survive in motion, and here there is none. The stillness you are inhabiting now is not passive. It is structurally active. It reorganizes without force. It resolves without confrontation. Psalm 91 speaks of abiding, not visiting, not passing through. Abiding is a long posture, a way of remaining that does not require vigilance. As you remain, the system begins to trust that this state will not be interrupted. That trust is essential. Without trust, the body stays prepared. With trust, preparation ends. This is why nothing needs to be done. Even the idea of letting go becomes unnecessary. Letting go still implies effort. Here, effort dissolves on its own. There may be moments when the mind attempts to re-engage. It may look for meaning, insight, or reassurance. Allow it to drift without resistance. It will return to quiet when it realizes there is nothing to manage. This is the intelligence of rest. Rest is not absence. It is alignment without friction. As time passes, you may notice a gentle heaviness, not the weight that once pressed inward, but a grounding sensation, the kind that anchors rather than burdens. This is the body settling into safety. Safety allows depth, and depth allows endurance. This is why the experience continues to work over long durations. The longer you remain, the deeper the baseline becomes. And what was once persistent loses relevance simply because it does not belong here. Psalm 70 reinforces this transition. It does not rush the process. It supports the removal of delay without urgency. It carries the sense that what is aligned does not need to struggle to arrive. Alignment replaces effort. As alignment stabilizes, old internal narratives weaken. Stories that once explained your inner tension no longer make sense. They dissolve, not because they are disproven, but because they are no longer useful. You may notice that thoughts arise less frequently. When they do, they pass without pulling attention. This is not suppression, it is disengagement. Disengagement is the end of influence. This is how ancestral patterns truly release, not through confrontation but through irrelevance. They no longer find the conditions they require to repeat. Nothing announces this moment. You simply notice that what once accompanied you does not anymore. As the video continues, the sound of the voice may blend into the background. This is intentional. The words are not meant to instruct now, they are meant to accompany. Let them. The nervous system responds more to consistency than to intensity. Consistency is what you are experiencing now, and consistency is what recalibrates the deepest layers. This is why the process feels inevitable rather than forced. Nothing here needs your agreement. Nothing requires belief. It functions because it is aligned with rest, not because it persuades. Remain where you are. Allow the passage of time to work on your behalf. The quiet authority described in Psalm 27 does not demand recognition. It exists independently of attention. It stands without resistance. And as you remain within this environment, what once felt permanent continues to dissolve, quietly, steadily, and without return. As time continues to unfold, the experience begins to feel less like something you are listening to and more like something you are inside of. The distinction between attention and presence becomes softer. You are no longer following the words. The words are simply moving alongside you. This is where the process deepens without effort. The inner system no longer checks whether it is safe. Safety has already been established. And once safety becomes familiar, the need for constant internal monitoring dissolves. For many, this is unfamiliar territory. A life lived under unseen pressure often trains the system to stay engaged, alert, and responsive even in moments of rest. The absence of that engagement can feel strange at first, but strangeness fades quickly when nothing interrupts the calm. The body understands before the mind does. As muscles remain relaxed for longer periods, the nervous system receives a clear signal. There is no threat to prepare for. This signal repeats itself quietly, over and over, until it becomes the new baseline. Baselines matter. What followed you for years did not follow you because it was powerful. It followed you because it became part of your baseline. It shaped how your system interpreted the world. And now that interpretation is changing, not dramatically, not suddenly, but completely. Psalm 91 describes protection as something that surrounds rather than intervenes. When protection surrounds, there is no need for reaction. Reaction belongs to exposed spaces. You are no longer in one. As minutes continue to pass, the sense of time itself may shift. It may feel slower, less demanding. This is not distraction. This is regulation. The system is no longer rushing toward relief because relief is already present. This is how endurance becomes natural. Endurance here does not mean tolerating difficulty. It means remaining without strain. The kind of endurance that does not feel like effort at all. This is why nothing needs to be concluded. The experience does not build toward an ending. It widens into stability. If thoughts arise about what comes next, allow them to pass without engagement. There is no transition required. You are not moving from one state to another. You are settling into one that already exists. The words continue not to guide, but to remain. Remaining is enough. Psalm 27 speaks of confidence that exists even when the future is unknown. This confidence does not depend on certainty, it depends on grounding. And grounding is happening now, quietly, without instruction. As grounding deepens, the inner world becomes less reactive to memory. Memories may surface, but they do not demand interpretation. They do not pull you backward. They are simply observed, then released. This is another sign that influence has weakened. Influence requires reaction. Without reaction, it fades. The longer this environment remains uninterrupted, the more the old patterns lose coherence. They cannot organize themselves without participation, and participation has ended. This is the quiet ending, not a moment, but a condition. If you notice long stretches where nothing captures your attention, let them be. These are not gaps to fill. These are spaces where recalibration completes itself. The nervous system thrives in predictability. The predictability here is rest. Rest is not inactivity, it is alignment without resistance. As alignment continues, a subtle strength becomes noticeable. Not excitement, not confidence in action, but steadiness, the kind that does not need to prove itself. This is quiet authority. Quiet authority does not announce itself, it does not demand validation. It simply exists, and nothing unnecessary can remain in its presence for long. This is why the pressure continues to lose its hold, not because it is pushed away, but because there is no place for it to stand. Remain here, let the duration do its work. The unraveling continues, silently, inevitably, and without return. As the environment remains steady, the inner experience continues to simplify. What once felt layered, complex, or tangled no longer demands interpretation. The system is no longer searching for causes or outcomes. It has settled into orientation rather than explanation. This is an important distinction. Explanation keeps the mind active. Orientation allows the whole system to rest. You are no longer trying to understand what changed. You are living inside the change itself. The unseen pressure that once operated quietly relied on complexity. It thrived in confusion, in unresolved questions, in subtle tension. But complexity cannot survive in sustained simplicity. It dissolves when there is nothing to feed it. Simplicity does not mean lack of depth. It means lack of resistance. As the minutes continue, the body maintains its state without effort. Breathing remains slow. Muscles remain unguarded. There is no signal calling the system back into alertness. This is how safety becomes embodied. Psalm 91 speaks of refuge not as a temporary shelter, but as a place of residence. To reside is to remain without preparing to leave. And remaining changes the way the system interprets everything else. When refuge becomes familiar, external pressure loses relevance. It may still exist somewhere outside awareness, but it no longer reaches inward. This is why nothing needs to be blocked or resisted. Resistance implies engagement. Engagement implies relevance. What followed you for years no longer feels relevant. As this irrelevance settles in, you may notice a quiet clarity. Not insight, not realization, but a gentle sense that nothing is wrong. That sense alone restructures the inner world more effectively than effort ever could. The nervous system responds deeply to the absence of threat. When threat is absent consistently, old protective patterns deactivate automatically. There is no announcement, there is no transition ritual. They simply stop. Psalm 70 supports this phase by reinforcing alignment without delay. It removes urgency without removing movement. The shift does not stall. It stabilizes. Stability allows endurance. This is why the experience does not ask anything of you. It does not require participation beyond remaining present. And even presence does not need to be maintained. It arises naturally when there is nothing pulling attention away. If the mind drifts into sleep, let it. If it drifts into quiet awareness, let it. Both states support the same process. The words continue at a pace that does not demand listening. They are not instructions. They are anchors, gently reminding the system that it is safe to remain where it is. Nothing needs to happen next. As time passes, the sense of identity itself softens, not in a way that feels disorienting, but in a way that feels spacious. You are not disappearing. You are becoming less defined by what once pressed against you. This spaciousness is another form of authority. Authority here is not control over circumstances. It is freedom from internal pressure. And freedom from pressure changes how the future is approached, quietly, without tension. Psalm 27 describes a confidence that does not depend on removal of threat. It exists even when circumstances remain unknown. That confidence is not emotional, it is structural, and it is forming now. What once followed you cannot attach to a structure that no longer resonates with tension. It may attempt to reappear out of habit, but it finds no response. And without response, it cannot persist. This is the nature of quiet endings. They do not declare themselves finished. They simply stop repeating. As this realization integrates, the system no longer scans for signs of progress. Progress is not something to measure here. It is something to remain within. The longer you remain, the deeper the recalibration settles. This is why duration matters. Time itself becomes an ally. Each passing minute reinforces the same message to the nervous system. Nothing is required, nothing is wrong, nothing is pressing inward. The old weight continues to lose coherence, not because it is addressed, but because it is no longer included. Remain here. Allow the quiet to continue doing what force never could. The environment holds. Relaxation spreads when it is not interrupted. Nothing here interrupts it. The words continue at a pace that respects the body's need for time. They do not rush. They do not build. They do not resolve. They remain. And as they remain, the unseen weight continues to lose its hold, quietly, steadily, without resistance. As the state of rest continues uninterrupted, the inner system begins to recognize something it may not have experienced consistently before: continuity without effort. This continuity is not maintained by intention. It exists on its own, quietly reinforcing itself moment by moment. For many, this is the first time rest does not feel temporary. Temporary rest always carries a trace of tension, a subtle awareness that something will soon require response. But here, that awareness is absent. And in its absence, the system settles more deeply than it ever could through effort. This depth is not dramatic, it is not emotional, it is stabilizing. The unseen pressure that once operated beneath awareness relied on interruption. It relied on moments of calm being brief, fragile, or conditional. When calm becomes continuous, pressure loses its leverage. It does not argue, it does not resist, it simply fades. Psalm 91 describes protection that remains present regardless of external conditions. It does not fluctuate with circumstances. It does not respond to threat, it surrounds. Surrounding protection changes how the body interprets sensation. The system no longer scans for threat because it no longer expects it. This expectation shift is subtle but decisive. Expectation shapes experience. When the expectation of disturbance ends, disturbance has nowhere to enter. As more time passes, the body continues to release patterns of readiness that once felt necessary. Shoulders soften, jaw relaxes, breathing deepens without instruction. These changes are not signals to be noticed or analyzed. They are simply evidence of alignment. Alignment does not announce itself, it settles. The mind may occasionally attempt to return to old habits, checking, evaluating, wondering if something should be happening. Allow these impulses to pass without engagement. They will fade when they receive no response. The system is learning that nothing needs to be managed. This learning takes time, and time is being given freely here. Psalm 70 reinforces this generosity of time. It removes the sense of delay without creating urgency. It assures the inner world that nothing is late, nothing is missing, nothing needs to catch up. This assurance allows the system to stop pushing forward. Forward movement belongs to tension. Stillness belongs to safety. Safety is present. As the experience continues, awareness may drift in and out, sometimes clear, sometimes distant. Both states support the same process. There is no correct way to listen. There is no optimal level of attention. The words are not instructions. They are a steady presence, something consistent enough for the nervous system to rely on. Consistency is what rewires deeply. Inconsistent calm teaches vigilance. Consistent calm teaches trust. Trust dissolves pressure. This is why the experience feels gradual but irreversible. Nothing here is dramatic enough to collapse. Everything is stable enough to remain. As stability deepens, old internal references lose meaning. Memories may arise without emotional charge. Future concerns may appear without urgency. They pass through a space that no longer organizes itself around tension. This is the quiet restructuring. What followed you for years no longer finds resonance. It does not recognize this environment, and without resonance, it cannot persist. You do not need to notice its absence. Absence does not require attention. The fact that you are not thinking about what once pressed inward is itself the confirmation. Remain here. Allow the duration to continue working below awareness. As more time passes, a subtle sense of authority becomes noticeable. Not authority over others, not authority over outcomes, authority over internal space. The kind that does not argue with fear because fear no longer has a voice. This authority is quiet. It does not posture, it does not defend, it simply exists. Psalm 27 speaks of confidence that does not depend on circumstances changing. This confidence emerges when orientation is stable. Orientation is stable now. You are not oriented toward resolution. You are not oriented toward explanation. You are oriented toward presence. Presence dissolves what explanation never could. As the video continues, the rhythm remains unchanged. The pace remains slow. The tone remains steady. Nothing builds, nothing resolves. This is intentional. The nervous system relaxes most deeply when it can predict what comes next. And here, what comes next is more of the same. As the continuity holds, the inner world begins to respond in a way that is difficult to describe, but unmistakable once it is felt. There is less commentary, less internal narration, less need to label what is happening. Experience becomes simpler, quieter, and more direct. This simplicity is not emptiness, it is coherence. Coherence occurs when nothing inside is pulling in a different direction, when thoughts, sensations, and awareness are no longer competing for control. This lack of competition creates an internal silence that does not feel imposed. It feels earned through consistency. The unseen pressure that once followed you depended on fragmentation. It thrived when the inner world was divided, when one part of you was resting while another remained alert, preparing or bracing. That division no longer exists here. Division required effort. Unity requires nothing. Psalm 91 speaks of being covered, not monitored. Covered means nothing needs to be watched. Nothing needs to be guarded. Protection does not require vigilance. As this truth settles deeper, the body continues to respond. Heart rate steadies. Breathing becomes rhythmic without intention. Muscles that once held subtle tension remain released for longer periods. These changes do not reverse. Reversal requires threat. Threat is absent. The nervous system recognizes this absence not once, but repeatedly. Each repetition reinforces the same conclusion. There is no need to prepare, and when preparation ends, pressure loses its last foothold. This is why the experience feels cumulative. Nothing happens all at once. Everything happens through duration. Psalm 70 quietly supports this duration. It removes the impulse to rush toward relief. Relief is no longer a destination. It is the environment itself. When relief becomes environmental, the system no longer scans for it. Scanning creates tension. Here, there is nothing to scan for. As minutes continue to pass, you may notice long stretches where awareness drifts without concern. This drifting is not distraction. It is a sign that the system no longer needs to stay focused to remain safe. Safety no longer depends on attention. This is one of the deepest shifts a person can experience. For a long time, attention may have been used as protection, watching, monitoring, anticipating. But attention can finally rest when protection is no longer conditional. The voice continues at a pace that mirrors this rest, not guiding, not instructing, simply accompanying. The words exist as a stable background, allowing the body to remain oriented without effort. Nothing in this experience asks you to change. Change is happening anyway. As stability deepens, even the memory of pressure becomes less vivid. You may remember that something once existed, but the emotional charge attached to that memory weakens. This is how patterns dissolve permanently. Permanent change does not require reinforcement. It requires compatibility. The old pressure is no longer compatible with this state. Compatibility determines what can persist. As this incompatibility settles in, you may sense a gentle confidence, not excitement, not certainty, just a quiet sense that nothing needs to be fixed. This is quiet authority. Quiet authority does not announce victory. It does not confront opposition. It simply occupies space. And when space is fully occupied by presence, nothing unnecessary can remain. Psalm 27 speaks of standing without fear, even before circumstances shift. That standing is not rigid. It is relaxed. It does not brace. It does not prepare. Preparation has ended. As the experience continues, time remains generous. There is no countdown, no signal that something must happen next. The absence of transition allows the system to deepen rather than move on. Depth replaces movement. Depth is what sustains long listening. Depth allows the experience to continue without fatigue. Fatigue arises from effort. Effort is absent. As more time passes, the environment continues to do what effort never could. It gently but decisively removes the conditions that once allowed pressure to persist. No force, no confrontation, no urgency, only continuity. The unseen weight continues to lose coherence, not because it is addressed, not because it is remembered, but because it is no longer included. Remain here. Allow the duration to continue working beneath awareness. The quiet holds. As the quiet continues uninterrupted, the system begins to experience something even more foundational than calm. It experiences reliability. Not the kind that depends on circumstance, but the kind that exists regardless of what arises. Reliability is different from relief. Relief still carries contrast. It implies something difficult existed before and something better arrived after. Reliability removes contrast altogether. There is no before and after here. There is only continuity. And continuity is what reshapes the deepest layers. For a long time, your inner world may have learned to function in fragments of peace, short moments where things felt lighter, followed by a return of pressure. That rhythm trained the system to expect fluctuation. Expectation itself became a form of tension. Here, fluctuation is absent. The environment remains the same. The tone remains the same. The pace remains the same. Nothing interrupts the state you are in. This sameness is not dull. It is regulating. The nervous system relies on sameness to recalibrate. It releases vigilance when it no longer needs to track change. Change requires attention. Stability does not. This is why attention begins to soften naturally. The unseen pressure that once followed you depended on attention. It survived by pulling focus inward, by maintaining a subtle sense of urgency, by keeping part of you alert even in rest. That mechanism no longer functions here. Focus is no longer being pulled. As minutes pass, the inner world stops orienting itself around the possibility of disruption. The idea of disruption loses relevance. It no longer fits into the experience you are inhabiting. This is not denial, this is reorganization. Psalm 91 speaks of dwelling in protection as a location, not an action. A dwelling place does not require upkeep. It remains stable whether you notice it or not. As you remain, the system learns that this stability does not need to be defended. Defense ends. Defense ending is one of the most decisive moments in any deep internal shift. Defense keeps tension alive, even when danger is gone. When defense ends, tension dissolves without effort. You may notice that even the subtle impulse to adjust your posture, your breath, or your focus fades. The body no longer feels the need to correct itself. Correction belongs to threat. There is no threat here. This absence is being confirmed again and again. The voice continues at a steady pace, not to guide you forward, but to remain consistent. Consistency communicates safety more effectively than reassurance ever could. Reassurance implies doubt. Consistency removes it. Psalm 70 supports this phase by dissolving the sense that something must happen soon. It removes the pressure of timing. It reassures the inner world that nothing is delayed, nothing is incomplete, nothing is waiting to begin. This allows the system to remain exactly where it is. Remaining becomes natural. As remaining becomes natural, the inner world stops checking itself. It no longer monitors whether it is calm enough, quiet enough, or settled enough. Self-monitoring fades when there is nothing to evaluate. Evaluation ends. When evaluation ends, influence ends with it. Influence requires judgment. Judgment requires comparison. Here there is nothing to compare. The experience is self-contained. As time continues, you may notice that memories surface less frequently, and when they do, they carry little weight. They appear without narrative, without pull, without consequence. This is not forgetting, it is detachment. Detachment is not distance, it is freedom from relevance. What followed you for years relied on relevance. It required constant reference, conscious or unconscious. That reference has dissolved. This dissolution does not need reinforcement. It does not require repetition of ideas. It settles because the conditions that supported it no longer exist. As the environment continues unchanged, the body deepens into rest without drifting into collapse. This rest is alert enough to remain aware, but relaxed enough to release effort entirely. This balance is rare. It emerges only when the system trusts that nothing will interrupt it. Trust is forming now. Trust does not feel like belief. It feels like lack of resistance. Resistance has ended. Psalm 27 speaks of a confidence that does not wait for confirmation. It does not depend on circumstances aligning. It stands because it is aligned internally. That alignment is stabilizing here. You are not moving towards something. You are not holding on to something. You are inhabiting something. Inhabiting removes effort. As minutes extend further, the sense of time becomes increasingly irrelevant. The experience does not mark progress. It does not signal transition. It does not invite conclusion. This absence of conclusion is intentional. Endings create anticipation. Anticipation reintroduces tension. And what has nothing to do eventually disappears. Not dramatically, not loudly, but completely. Remain where you are. Allow the continuity to continue shaping the inner world beneath awareness. Nothing needs to change, nothing needs to end. The environment holds, and it will continue to hold. As the experience moves beyond this point, something important becomes clear without needing to be named. The system is no longer transitioning, it has arrived. And arrival here does not feel like reaching a destination. It feels like stopping movement altogether. Movement belonged to pressure. Stillness belongs to safety. At this stage, there is nothing left to anticipate. The inner world is no longer waiting for relief, explanation, or confirmation. Waiting itself has dissolved. And when waiting ends, time loosens its grip. This is why the experience feels expansive rather than directional. You are no longer moving through the video. The video is simply existing alongside you. As minutes continue to pass, the body maintains its state effortlessly. There is no need to correct posture, adjust breath, or refine attention. Correction is a response to threat. Threat is absent. Absence is being confirmed continuously. The unseen pressure that once followed you relied on interruption. It survived when calm was broken, when rest was fragile, when quiet could not be trusted to last. Here, quiet is uninterrupted, and interruption no longer arrives. This lack of interruption teaches the system something it may never have fully learned before. Calm does not require defense. Defense dissolves slowly, layer by layer. The deepest layers release last, not because they resist, but because they were built to endure. And endurance is finally no longer necessary. Psalm 91 speaks of remaining under protection, not moving in and out of it. Remaining changes everything. When protection is stable, the system stops scanning for exits. Scanning ends. When scanning ends, the inner world becomes spacious. Not empty, but unburdened. Thoughts have room to pass without crowding. Sensations arise without urgency. Awareness spreads without effort. This spaciousness is another sign that the old weight has lost relevance. Relevance was its lifeline. As relevance fades, memory itself reorganizes. The past no longer presses inward. It no longer demands interpretation. It becomes background rather than reference point. This shift does not feel dramatic. It feels natural. Natural states do not announce themselves. As the experience continues, you may notice longer periods where awareness drifts gently, sometimes toward sleep, sometimes toward quiet observation. Both are welcomed here. Neither interrupts the process. The process does not depend on consciousness. It depends on environment. The environment is stable. Psalm 70 continues to support this stability by removing any sense that something should happen soon. There is no urgency built into this space. Nothing is arriving late. Nothing is being delayed. Time is no longer a problem to solve. When time stops being a problem, the nervous system rests deeply. Deep rest is cumulative. Each minute reinforces the same message. Nothing is required. Nothing is wrong. Nothing is pressing inward. This repetition is not redundant. It is regulatory. Regulation happens through consistency, not intensity. As the voice continues, it remains steady, predictable, unchanging. This predictability is intentional. It allows the system to release even subtle vigilance. Vigilance dissolves when there is nothing new to monitor. This is why the experience does not evolve dramatically. Evolution would require attention. Stability allows release. As stability continues, the inner world no longer negotiates with itself. There is no internal dialogue weighing options, assessing feelings, or preparing responses. Dialogue fades when there is nothing to respond to. Silence fills the space naturally. This silence is not empty. It is full of absence. Absence of pressure, absence of urgency, absence of internal resistance. Psalm 27 speaks of confidence that exists without external confirmation. That confidence grows quietly here, not as a feeling, but as orientation. Orientation is stable. You are not oriented toward fear. You are not oriented toward resolution. You are oriented toward presence. Presence sustains itself. As minutes extend beyond this point, the experience continues to deepen, not by adding, but by subtracting. Each passing moment removes another layer of unnecessary effort. Effort was never required here. What followed you for years depended on effort to remain relevant. Without effort, it cannot persist. This is why the weakening continues even when nothing seems to be happening. Nothing needs to happen. Remain here. Allow the duration to continue working beneath awareness. The quiet remains unchanged. The environment holds. As the stillness remains uninterrupted, the inner world settles into something even quieter than calm. It settles into familiarity. Calm can still feel like a contrast. Familiarity feels like home. When a state becomes familiar, the system no longer evaluates it. Evaluation belongs to unfamiliar territory. Here, nothing needs to be checked. This is where the deepest release happens. Release does not arrive as an event. It arrives as the absence of effort. Effort fades first from the body, then from thought, and finally from identity itself. You are no longer someone who is trying to rest. You are simply resting. The unseen pressure that once followed you relied on identity. It needed you to be someone who carried something, someone who endured, someone who managed. As identity softens, the pressure loses its last anchor. Anchors are quiet things. When they release, nothing dramatic occurs. There is simply more space. As minutes continue to pass, the experience becomes increasingly uniform. The same tone, the same pace, the same sense of safety repeating itself without interruption. This uniformity is not accidental. It is the condition under which the nervous system finally stops negotiating. Negotiation ends when the outcome is no longer uncertain. Psalm 91 speaks of dwelling, and dwelling implies trust that the place will remain. When the inner world trusts that this environment is not temporary, it stops preparing for departure. Preparation dissolves. Without preparation, there is no pressure. This is why the change feels irreversible. The system has learned something new about safety. And what the system learns at this level does not easily unlearn. As the experience continues, you may notice that awareness becomes softer around the edges. There is less distinction between inside and outside. Sounds may feel distant or closer without changing importance. Sensations arise without demanding interpretation. This softening is not loss of clarity. It is reduction of boundaries. Boundaries were necessary when pressure was present. Here, they relax. Psalm 70 continues to support this relaxation by removing the sense that something must occur within a certain time. It dissolves the internal clock that once measured progress, effort, or outcome. Time becomes background. When time moves to the background, endurance becomes effortless. This is why the experience can continue for long durations without fatigue. Fatigue is the result of effort and monitoring. Both have ended. As the voice continues, it does not attempt to lead you anywhere. It stays with you. Staying is more important than moving. Staying allows the inner world to recognize that nothing is changing, and therefore nothing needs to be managed. Management dissolves. Management was one of the deepest expressions of the old pressure. Without management, there is freedom. This freedom does not feel exciting. It feels steady. Steadiness is what sustains. As minutes extend, the inner world stops revisiting the past. Not because the past is denied, but because it no longer explains anything relevant. The present is sufficient. Sufficiency dissolves the need for reference. Reference ends. When reference ends, patterns lose continuity. They cannot repeat without being referenced. They cannot persist without being remembered. This is how cycles truly end, not through confrontation, not through resolution, but through loss of relevance. Psalm 27 speaks of confidence that stands quietly, without argument. That confidence is not built here, it is uncovered. It emerges naturally when nothing opposes it. Opposition required pressure. Pressure has faded. As the experience continues, there is no signal that anything should conclude, no sense of nearing an end. This absence is intentional. Endings create anticipation, and anticipation reintroduces tension. Here, nothing is anticipated. The process continues below awareness, where the deepest changes occur. You may notice moments where the words fade entirely from attention. This is not disengagement, it is integration. The environment continues to hold even when awareness drifts. Holding does not require observation. As more time passes, the body remains settled without correction. The mind remains quiet without suppression. Identity remains light without effort. This combination is rare. It emerges only when the system is allowed to remain long enough without interruption. Remain here. Allow the continuity to continue shaping the inner world in ways that do not need to be noticed. The unseen weight continues to lose coherence, not because it is challenged, not because it is remembered, but because it no longer belongs. The environment does not support it. And what the environment does not support cannot remain. The quiet continues. The refuge holds. Nothing needs to change. As the continuity remains unbroken, the inner experience becomes increasingly effortless. Effort itself begins to feel unfamiliar, as if it belongs to a different way of being that is no longer active here. There is nothing to maintain, nothing to reinforce, nothing to protect. Protection is already present. This is one of the most important transitions, even though it passes almost unnoticed. The system no longer treats calm as something that must be preserved. Calm is no longer fragile. It is not dependent on circumstances, thoughts, or awareness. It simply exists. When calm becomes independent, the body relaxes in a way that does not rebound. There is no subtle tightening beneath the surface, no background vigilance, no internal readiness. Readiness belonged to pressure. Pressure no longer belongs here. As minutes continue to pass, the sense of identity softens even further. You are no longer defined by what you are doing, thinking, or feeling. You are defined by what you are not responding to. This absence of response is not withdrawal. It is completion. Completion does not announce itself. It settles. Psalm 91 speaks of abiding under protection, and abiding implies duration without condition. There is no requirement to remain aware of protection for it to function. Awareness was never the source of safety. Safety was always environmental. As the environment remains unchanged, the nervous system stops differentiating between moments of listening and moments of rest. The two merge. Listening becomes resting. Resting becomes listening. This merging is not confusion, it is integration. Integration ends internal separation. Internal separation was one of the deepest sources of pressure. A part of you resting while another remained alert. A part of you calm while another remained cautious. That division no longer exists. Unity replaces division. Unity requires no effort. Psalm 70 continues to dissolve any lingering sense of urgency. There is no timeline here, no point at which something must occur, no expectation of outcome. This absence of expectation allows the system to fully inhabit the present without tension. Expectation was heavy. Without expectation, the inner world feels lighter, not because something was removed, but because nothing is being carried forward. As the experience continues, awareness may feel broader, less centered on the self. This is not loss of self. It is expansion beyond the need to constantly reference oneself. Self-reference was another form of pressure. When self-reference fades, experience becomes simple. Simplicity is not reduction. It is clarity without effort. As more time passes, the body continues to rest deeply while remaining stable. There is no collapse into sleep unless it is natural. There is no drifting into distraction unless it is gentle. Everything that happens here happens without friction. Friction was the old signal of pressure. The absence of friction confirms the shift. Psalm 27 speaks of standing firm without fear, and fear here is not an emotion. It is a posture, a readiness to respond. That posture has dissolved. Standing remains. Standing does not strain, it does not brace, it does not anticipate, it simply exists. As the video continues, the tone remains unchanged, the words remain unhurried, the space remains open. Nothing in the environment signals that something should change. This consistency is what allows the deepest layers to release. Deep layers do not respond to intensity, they respond to reliability. Reliability is present. Minute after minute, the same message is delivered without words. Nothing is required, nothing is wrong, nothing is pressing inward. This message does not need to be understood. It needs to be felt repeatedly. Repetition without variation is not redundancy here. It is regulation. Regulation occurs when the system encounters the same safe condition over and over without interruption. This is what you are experiencing now. As the unseen weight continues to lose coherence, it does not leave behind a void. It leaves behind stability. Stability does not demand attention. It does not require reinforcement. It remains. You may notice that even the idea of progress no longer applies. There is no movement forward, no movement backward. There is only remaining. Remaining is sufficient. As time continues, the experience does not narrow. It widens gently, allowing more of you to exist without tension. Thoughts, sensations, awareness all coexist without competition. Competition was pressure. Without competition, there is ease. This ease is not emotional, it is structural. Structural ease does not fluctuate, it holds. Remain here. Allow the continuity to continue shaping the inner world beneath awareness. There is nothing to complete, there is nothing to conclude, there is nothing to prepare for. The refuge remains active, the quiet continues. As the experience continues to unfold without interruption, the inner world reaches a point where nothing is being waited for. This absence of waiting is subtle, but it marks a decisive shift. Waiting always carries tension, even when it is quiet. Here, that tension has dissolved. What remains is presence without direction. Presence without direction does not search. It does not scan. It does not anticipate. It simply remains available. This availability is different from alertness. Alertness prepares for something. Availability does not. Availability is open without effort, receptive without demand. The unseen pressure that once followed you depended on preparation. It thrived when part of you remained oriented toward what might happen next. That orientation has ended. Orientation now rests in stillness. Psalm 91 speaks of remaining under covering, and covering implies consistency. A covering does not fluctuate with awareness. It does not require attention to remain effective. It holds whether it is noticed or not. As this understanding settles deeper, the system stops checking whether it is safe. Safety no longer needs confirmation. Confirmation belonged to uncertainty. Uncertainty dissolves here. As minutes pass, the experience becomes less about listening and more about inhabiting. The words lose their edge. They soften into the background. Their purpose has shifted. They are no longer carrying meaning. They are carrying continuity. Continuity regulates. The nervous system responds to continuity by releasing the last traces of readiness. These traces are often so subtle they go unnoticed. A slight holding in the chest, a barely perceptible tightening in the jaw, a quiet bracing in the abdomen. As time continues without interruption, even these traces release. This release is permanent. Permanent change does not announce itself. It does not celebrate. It simply settles. Psalm 70 continues to remove the sense of delay without introducing urgency. It reassures the inner world that nothing is falling behind, that nothing is being missed, that nothing needs to arrive for this state to be complete. Completion is already present. When completion is present, effort becomes illogical. There is nothing to add, nothing to correct, nothing to improve. Improvement belongs to dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction is absent. As the experience continues, awareness may feel diffuse, spread gently across the body rather than focused in one place. This diffusion is not distraction, it is integration. The system is no longer prioritizing one signal over another. Prioritization ends when there is no threat. Threat is absent. As more time passes, the inner world stops referencing itself. There is less sense of "I am experiencing this," and more sense of simply being within it. This is not loss of self. It is release of self-monitoring. Self-monitoring was another layer of pressure. Without self-monitoring, the system rests more deeply. Psalm 27 speaks of a steadiness that exists even before circumstances change. This steadiness does not depend on feeling strong. It depends on being unopposed internally. Opposition has dissolved. As the environment remains unchanged, the inner world becomes predictable in the best way. Predictability here does not mean monotony. It means safety without interruption. Safety without interruption is rare. It allows the deepest systems to reset. As minutes extend further, you may notice that even subtle emotional tones flatten into neutrality. Not numbness, but balance. Emotional balance emerges naturally when the system no longer compensates for tension. Compensation ends. What remains is simple presence, stable and quiet. This is why the experience does not need to escalate. Escalation would disrupt the regulation that is taking place. Stability allows the process to continue beneath awareness. As the voice continues, it remains unchanged. This sameness is intentional. It mirrors the internal state being established. Nothing in the pacing suggests urgency. Nothing in the tone suggests resolution. This absence allows the inner world to relax even further. Relaxation deepens when there is nothing to respond to. As time continues, the unseen weight continues to lose relevance. It does not return. It does not reassert itself. It does not attempt to adapt. It simply no longer belongs. Belonging determines what can remain. This environment does not support pressure, urgency, or inner resistance. It supports presence, continuity, and rest. Remain here. Allow the duration to continue reinforcing what the body already knows. Nothing needs to happen next. Nothing needs to end. The refuge remains active. The quiet continues, and the state you are in continues to hold, gently, steadily, without interruption. Out. As the stillness remains unchanged, the inner system reaches a phase where even rest no longer feels like an action. Rest is no longer something you enter or leave. It is simply the condition that remains when nothing is being resisted. Resistance had a sound, a texture, a subtle pressure beneath thought. That texture is no longer present. What replaces it is not excitement or relief, but neutrality that feels safe. Neutrality that does not need to be explained. Neutrality that does not invite evaluation. Evaluation has ended. When evaluation ends, the mind no longer searches for signals. It stops asking whether this state will last. It stops wondering if something else should happen. The question itself dissolves. Questions belong to tension. Here, there is no tension to question. Psalm 91 describes a place that does not require constant awareness to remain effective. Protection is not dependent on attention. It does not weaken when unnoticed. It does not strengthen when acknowledged. It simply holds. As time continues to pass, the body responds by deepening its rest even further. Not through collapse, but through grounding. A sense of weight returns to the body, not as burden, but as anchoring. The body feels supported rather than held up. Support changes everything. When the body feels supported, the mind releases control. Control was never natural. It was learned as a response to pressure. Without pressure, control has no function. Control dissolves quietly. The unseen pressure that once followed you relied on control to survive. It required monitoring, preparation, internal correction. None of those are active here. This is why the weakening continues even though nothing is being done. Nothing needs to be done. Psalm 70 continues to dissolve any trace of urgency. It removes the internal push that once kept things moving forward. Forward movement is no longer required when the system is already where it needs to be. This absence of push allows time to stretch without demand. As minutes extend, the experience becomes increasingly uniform. The same calm, the same pace, the same gentle presence repeating itself without variation. This repetition is not boring, it is regulating. Regulation happens through repetition without threat. Each moment that passes without interruption confirms the same message to the nervous system. This state is safe. This state is stable. This state is allowed to continue. Allowed states deepen. As the experience deepens, the inner world no longer organizes itself around identity. You are not thinking about who you are, what you are doing, or how you are feeling. Those references lose importance when nothing inside is pulling for attention. Identity softens. Softening does not mean disappearing. It means loosening unnecessary structure. Unnecessary structure was built to manage pressure. With pressure gone, structure relaxes. Psalm 27 speaks of standing without fear. Standing here is not posture, it is internal orientation. An orientation that does not lean forward or backward. It does not brace. It does not anticipate. It simply remains upright within stillness. As the voice continues, it remains predictable and unchanging. This predictability allows the deepest layers of vigilance to release. Vigilance cannot survive when there is nothing new to monitor. Monitoring ends. When monitoring ends, the inner world becomes quiet without being forced into silence. Silence emerges naturally when there is nothing to respond to. This silence is not empty, it is full of absence. Absence of pressure, absence of urgency, absence of inner resistance. As more time passes, the experience no longer feels like something happening. It feels like something that is already complete and continuing. Completion does not need confirmation. This is why the experience does not resolve. Resolution would imply a problem that needed to be solved. Here there is no problem. The unseen weight that once followed you no longer has a place within this environment. It cannot attach to stability. It cannot adapt to continuity. It cannot reframe itself as useful. It fades by exclusion. Exclusion is not force. It is incompatibility. What is incompatible cannot remain. As the minutes continue, the environment remains unchanged. The refuge does not fluctuate. The quiet does not break. Nothing enters to disrupt the state that is being established. This uninterrupted duration is what allows the deepest recalibration to occur. Recalibration does not announce itself. It settles beneath awareness. You do not need to notice it. You do not need to track it. It is happening because the conditions are correct. Remain here. Allow the continuity to continue without interruption. There is nothing to reach. There is nothing to complete. There is nothing to prepare for. The refuge remains. The quiet continues. And the state you are inhabiting continues to hold, gently, steadily, and without end. As the experience continues to hold without interruption, the inner world enters a phase where even subtle shifts become unnecessary. There is no longer a sense of progression. Progress belonged to effort. Here, effort has already dissolved. What remains is steadiness. Steadiness is not a feeling, it is a condition where nothing presses inward, nothing pulls attention forward, and nothing asks to be resolved. This condition does not fluctuate with thought. It remains whether you notice it or not. This is why the state feels reliable. Reliability allows the deepest layers of the system to finally disengage. Layers that stayed alert not because something was wrong, but because they learned to expect disruption. That expectation has been quietly disproven by time. Minute after minute, nothing interrupts. The body learns through repetition. Each uninterrupted moment reinforces the same message. There is no need to brace, no need to prepare, no need to monitor. Monitoring fades. When monitoring fades, the inner world stops fragmenting itself. There is no longer a part of you resting while another remains alert. The division that once maintained pressure has ended. Unity replaces division. Unity does not require effort. Psalm 91 describes a dwelling place that does not need to be defended. Defense is unnecessary when the environment itself is secure, and as you remain here, the system internalizes this security without instruction. Internalization is permanent. Permanent shifts do not feel dramatic, they feel ordinary. Ordinary calm is one of the clearest signs that something fundamental has changed. As the experience continues, you may notice that even subtle emotional tones smooth out, not into numbness, but into balance. Balance does not demand attention, it supports itself. Support replaces strain. Strain belonged to carrying something that no longer exists. The unseen pressure that once followed you relied on strain to remain relevant. Without strain, it has no way to assert itself. It does not announce its departure, it simply stops appearing. Absence confirms itself. Psalm 70 continues to dissolve any lingering sense of urgency by reinforcing that nothing is behind schedule, nothing is unfolding too slowly, nothing needs to accelerate. Time is no longer an obstacle, time becomes an ally. When time is no longer an obstacle, the system rests deeply. Deep rest does not collapse into sleep unless allowed, it remains stable, grounded, and receptive. Awareness floats gently without fixation. Fixation was pressure. Without fixation, the inner world breathes freely. As the voice continues, it remains intentionally unchanged. No variation in tone, no escalation, no resolution. This sameness is not accidental. It is the condition under which the nervous system completes its recalibration. Recalibration requires consistency. Consistency is present. As minutes extend further, you may notice that the sense of self becomes quieter. Not erased, not diminished, but less occupied with managing experience. Management dissolves when there is nothing to manage. Management was one of the deepest expressions of the old pattern. Without management, presence becomes effortless. Psalm 27 speaks of confidence that stands without strain. This confidence is not assertive, it does not confront, it does not declare, it simply exists, grounded and unshaken. This grounding continues to settle in the background. The experience no longer invites interpretation. There is nothing to interpret. Interpretation was necessary when something felt unresolved. Resolution is no longer relevant here. What followed you for years does not need to be understood to be released. It releases because the environment no longer supports it. Support determines persistence. This environment supports rest, presence, and continuity. It does not support pressure. As time continues, the quiet remains intact. There are no signals calling the system back into vigilance. Nothing changes suddenly. Nothing needs to. This lack of change is the change. As the minutes pass, the state you are in becomes increasingly self-sustaining. The video could continue without adding anything new, and the process would remain active. This is intentional. The deepest shifts occur not when something happens, but when nothing interrupts. Remain here. Allow the continuity to continue shaping the inner world beneath awareness. There is nothing to move toward. There is nothing to conclude. There is nothing to return to. The refuge remains active. The quiet continues, and the state you are in continues to hold, steady, reliable, and without demand. As the continuity remains intact, the experience begins to feel less like something unfolding and more like something that has always been here. There is no sense of arrival anymore because nothing new is being entered. What is present now feels foundational, as if it exists beneath all movement, beneath all change. This is the layer that was always meant to hold you. When the system reaches this depth, even subtle forms of effort become unnecessary. There is no longer a need to remain calm, to stay present, or to maintain awareness. Those ideas fall away naturally because the state no longer depends on them. Dependence dissolves. The unseen pressure that once followed you relied on dependence. It required something to lean on: tension, anticipation, inner noise. Without those supports, it cannot sustain itself. It does not fight. It does not linger. It simply loses relevance. Psalm 91 speaks of dwelling in protection as something continuous and unquestioned. A dwelling is not inspected, it is inhabited, and inhabiting changes the way the inner world understands safety. Safety becomes assumed. When safety is assumed, the nervous system no longer prepares for interruption. Preparation dissolves quietly, without announcement. Muscles remain relaxed without effort. Breath flows without guidance. Awareness settles without instruction. This settling does not reverse. As minutes continue to pass, the experience becomes increasingly uniform, not repetitive in a way that distracts, but steady in a way that reassures. The same tone, the same space, the same absence of demand repeating itself without variation. This repetition is not meant to stimulate, it is meant to regulate. Regulation completes itself through consistency. As consistency holds, even the idea of being in a process fades. Processes imply movement. Here, movement has ended. What remains is stability that does not seek change. Change is no longer necessary. Psalm 70 quietly reinforces this by removing any sense that something is still pending. There is no unfinished work here, nothing waiting to be completed, nothing arriving late. Completion is already present. When completion is present, striving becomes unnecessary. Striving was one of the deepest expressions of the old weight. Without striving, the system rests in a way that does not fluctuate. This rest is not passive, it is structurally active. It reorganizes without effort. As the voice continues, it does not introduce new ideas. New ideas would create motion. Motion would require attention. Attention would reintroduce effort. Instead, the words remain gentle and familiar, allowing the inner world to stay settled without needing to follow or respond. This is intentional. The deepest changes occur when nothing is asking for attention. As time extends further, awareness may feel increasingly spacious. There is less sense of center, less focus on any single point. This is not loss of grounding, it is expansion of safety. Safety spreads when it is uninterrupted. You may notice that even subtle emotional tones flatten into balance, not numbness but equilibrium. Emotional equilibrium does not call attention to itself, it simply remains. Remaining is the key here. Psalm 27 speaks of confidence that stands quietly, without argument or assertion. This confidence is not something you adopt. It emerges naturally when nothing inside opposes rest. Opposition has dissolved. As the environment continues unchanged, the inner world no longer revisits what once felt heavy. There is no pull toward old patterns, no curiosity about them, no need to check if they are gone. Checking would imply relevance. Relevance has ended. As minutes continue to pass, the experience becomes increasingly self-sustaining. The voice could fade entirely and the state would remain. This is a sign that the environment has been internalized. Internalization is permanent. Permanent shifts do not feel dramatic. They feel ordinary, ordinary calm, ordinary safety, ordinary absence of pressure. This ordinariness is the greatest confirmation. What once followed you no longer belongs to this ordinary state. It cannot integrate, it cannot adapt, it cannot return, not because it was pushed away, but because it is no longer supported. Remain here. Allow the continuity to continue without interruption. There is nothing to anticipate. There is nothing to resolve. There is nothing to complete. The refuge remains active. The quiet continues, and the state you are inhabiting continues to hold, steady, familiar, and without demand. As the baseline remains steady, the inner experience becomes almost transparent. There is no longer a sense of engaging with anything. Engagement implies effort. Here, effort has fully dissolved. What remains is a quiet availability. Availability does not lean forward. It does not wait. It does not anticipate. It simply exists. This is the point where even calm no longer stands out. Calm blends into the background, becoming so familiar that it no longer feels like a state. It feels like neutrality that is safe. Safe neutrality is powerful. It removes the need for comparison. There is no contrast between tension and relief. Relief no longer arrives because tension is absent. Without contrast, the system rests without fluctuation. The unseen pressure that once followed you depended on contrast to survive. It needed moments of disturbance to make calm feel temporary. Here, calm is uninterrupted, and interruption does not return. Psalm 91 describes protection that is assumed rather than requested. Assumed protection changes how the inner world functions. The system no longer seeks reassurance. Reassurance belonged to uncertainty. Uncertainty has dissolved. As time continues, the body remains settled without needing to adjust. There is no subtle urge to shift position or regulate breath unless it happens naturally. Natural movement is not correction, it is ease. Ease replaces effort. Psalm 70 continues to dissolve any trace of urgency. Urgency was not loud. It lived quietly beneath everything, shaping how time was experienced. Here, time is no longer something to manage. Managing time was pressure. Without pressure, time becomes spacious. As minutes extend, awareness may feel distant from any particular thought or sensation. This distance is not disengagement, it is perspective without effort. The system is no longer inside experience, it is resting within it. This resting is stable. Psalm 27 speaks of confidence that does not arise from overcoming fear, but from no longer organizing life around it. That reorganization has already taken place here. Fear no longer has a function. As the environment remains unchanged, the inner world stops rehearsing. Rehearsal was preparation. Preparation was necessary when interruption was expected. Interruption no longer arrives. Rehearsal ends. With rehearsal gone, the mind becomes quieter without being forced into silence. Silence emerges naturally when nothing needs to be practiced or repeated. This silence does not feel empty, it feels complete. Completeness dissolves striving. As time continues, the experience does not deepen through intensity, it deepens through familiarity. Familiarity allows the system to release the last subtle forms of vigilance. Vigilance dissolves last. When vigilance dissolves, the deepest layers finally rest. This rest does not announce itself, it does not feel dramatic, it feels ordinary. Ordinary safety, ordinary quiet, ordinary absence of pressure. This ordinariness is the most enduring form of change. The unseen weight that once followed you cannot return to ordinary safety. It requires disturbance to exist. Disturbance does not occur here. Not now, not later, not afterward. As minutes continue to pass, the environment remains unchanged. The voice remains steady, the pacing remains slow. Nothing signals transition, nothing signals completion. This lack of signal allows the system to remain without bracing for what comes next. Nothing comes next. The experience continues as it is. Remain here. Allow the continuity to continue working beneath awareness. There is nothing to achieve. There is nothing to finish. There is nothing to prepare for. The refuge remains active. The quiet continues, and the state you are in continues to hold. Calm, stable, familiar, and without demand. As the state remains unchanged, something subtle but decisive becomes clear. The system no longer distinguishes between before and after. Time no longer organizes experience into segments. There is no sense of having arrived somewhere because nothing was left behind. This is continuity without contrast. Contrast once carried weight. Contrast implied effort. Contrast implied movement. Here, contrast has dissolved. The unseen pressure that once followed you relied on contrast to make itself felt. It needed difference, tension, fluctuation. Without fluctuation, it has no signal to attach to. This is why the experience feels quiet rather than dramatic. Quiet does not argue. Quiet does not prove. Quiet does not respond, it simply remains. Psalm 91 speaks of a place where nothing intrudes. Intrusion requires openings. This environment has none. The inner world is no longer porous to pressure. Porosity belonged to vigilance. Vigilance has ended. As minutes continue, the body maintains its state without any impulse to adjust. There is no subtle urge to fix posture, regulate breath, or guide attention. Guidance is unnecessary when the system is already aligned. Alignment sustains itself. Psalm 70 continues to dissolve any lingering sense of urgency by reinforcing that nothing is incomplete. There is no stage left to reach, no threshold waiting ahead, no outcome to secure. Security is present. When security is present, the inner world releases even the idea of self-protection. Protection is no longer something to maintain, it is the background condition. Background conditions shape everything quietly. As time extends, awareness becomes less centered on any point. There is no focal tension, no edge to attention. Awareness spreads naturally without effort or intention. This spreading is not distraction. It is safety expressing itself. Safety does not contract. It allows space. The unseen weight that once followed you cannot exist in space. It required compression, density, and internal pressure. Space dissolves it without resistance, not by force, by incompatibility. As the environment remains unchanged, the system stops revisiting internal checkpoints. There is no sense of, am I still calm, or is this working? Those questions belong to uncertainty. Uncertainty has dissolved. As minutes continue to pass, even subtle emotional echoes flatten into balance. Balance is not numbness. It is equilibrium without effort. Emotions arise and pass without pulling attention or demanding meaning. Meaning-making has quieted. Meaning-making once served to manage discomfort. Without discomfort, it has no function. Psalm 27 speaks of confidence that does not lean on outcome. This confidence does not look ahead, it stands without reference. Reference points have faded. Without reference points, cycles cannot repeat. Cycles depend on memory, anticipation, and reaction. None of these are active here. This is how repetition ends. As the voice continues, it remains unchanged, predictable, and gentle. This sameness is intentional. It allows the nervous system to release the last traces of alertness that respond to novelty. Novelty required attention. Attention required readiness. Readiness has ended. As time stretches, the experience no longer feels like something happening. It feels like something that simply is. This isness does not ask to be understood. It does not invite commentary. It holds. Holding does not require effort. As more time passes, the environment remains exactly as it is. Nothing enters, nothing leaves, nothing shifts. This lack of change allows the deepest layers to settle permanently. Permanent settling feels ordinary, ordinary calm, ordinary presence, ordinary absence of pressure. This ordinariness is the clearest sign that the old weight has lost its place. It cannot return to a system that no longer recognizes tension as normal. Remain here. Allow the duration to continue reinforcing what has already stabilized. Nothing needs to be completed. Nothing needs to be concluded. Nothing needs to be anticipated. The refuge remains active. The quiet continues, and the state you are inhabiting continues to hold, gently, steadily, without interruption and without end. As the continuity remains undisturbed, the inner world settles into a rhythm that no longer feels like rhythm at all. It becomes background, something that does not draw attention, yet supports everything quietly. Background support is the deepest form of safety. When something moves into the background, it no longer requires awareness to remain effective. It does its work without asking to be noticed. This is what is happening now. The unseen pressure that once followed you depended on foreground presence. It needed to be felt, remembered, referenced. Here, nothing pulls it into awareness. Without awareness, it loses coherence. Coherence requires structure. Structure requires attention. Attention has softened. Psalm 91 describes protection that does not fluctuate. It is not activated. It is inhabited. Inhabiting something means no longer checking whether it is still there. Checking has ended. As time continues, the body remains settled in a way that does not require correction. There is no urge to refine the experience, improve it, or deepen it. Deepening happens automatically when nothing interferes. Interference belonged to effort. Without effort, depth stabilizes. Psalm 70 continues to remove any trace of urgency by dissolving the sense that something must arrive. Arrival implies movement. Here, movement has ceased. Cessation does not feel like stopping. It feels like rest without contrast. As awareness remains diffuse, the inner world no longer gathers itself around thought. Thought becomes optional. When it arises, it passes without forming chains or patterns. Patterns require repetition. Repetition requires engagement. Engagement has ended. Psalm 27 speaks of confidence that stands quietly without proving anything. This confidence is not something you adopt. It emerges naturally when nothing inside is opposing rest. Opposition has dissolved. As the environment remains unchanged, the system no longer marks time internally. There is no sense of minutes passing, no tracking of duration. Time fades into irrelevance. When time becomes irrelevant, endurance becomes effortless. This is why the experience can continue indefinitely without fatigue. Fatigue arises from effort and monitoring. Both are absent. As the voice continues, it remains intentionally neutral, not stimulating, not guiding, simply present. This neutrality allows the system to remain settled without responding. Response is unnecessary. As minutes extend, the sense of inner space expands gently, not outward, not upward, but evenly. There is no edge to experience, no place where tension gathers. Edges dissolve. Edges once held pressure. Without edges, pressure cannot form. The unseen weight that once followed you cannot exist without edges to press against. It has no surface to attach to. It has no structure to sustain it. It fades by default. As the duration continues, the experience does not signal progress. Progress would imply something to reach. Here, there is nothing to reach. Remaining is sufficient. Remaining does not require effort. It does not require awareness. It does not require intention. It sustains itself. As more time passes, the environment remains stable. No surprises, no shifts, no conclusions. This lack of conclusion is what allows the deepest settling to complete itself. Completion does not feel final. It feels ordinary calm, ordinary safety, ordinary absence of pressure. This ordinariness is the most durable state. What once followed you cannot return to ordinariness. It depended on disruption to survive. Disruption is absent. Remain here. Allow the continuity to continue without interruption. There is nothing to end. There is nothing to begin. There is nothing to prepare for. The refuge remains active. The quiet continues, and the state you are in continues to hold, steady, familiar, and without demand. As the continuity remains untouched, the inner experience becomes so consistent that it no longer registers as an experience. It becomes context, the backdrop against which everything else could occur, even though nothing needs to. Context does not demand attention. Context shapes quietly. This is why the system no longer reacts to quiet as if it were fragile. Quiet is no longer a break from something else. It is the default environment. Defaults are powerful. When something becomes default, the body stops checking it. The mind stops questioning it. The nervous system stops preparing for its loss. Preparation dissolves completely here. The unseen pressure that once followed you relied on preparation to survive. It existed in the space between now and what might happen next. Without that space, it has no structure. Structure collapses without noise. Psalm 91 speaks of a place that does not need reinforcement. A dwelling place does not ask to be confirmed. It is entered once and then assumed. Assumption replaces vigilance. As time continues, the inner world no longer tracks itself. There is no internal observer monitoring calm, no subtle awareness checking for change. Observation gives way to immersion. Immersion does not analyze, it inhabits. As immersion deepens, the system stops distinguishing between internal and external signals. Everything is processed evenly without urgency. Sounds pass, sensations pass, thoughts pass. Passing does not leave residue. Residue was pressure. Psalm 70 continues to dissolve any remaining sense of soon or later. The idea that something should happen next no longer arises. The inner timeline has gone quiet. When the timeline goes quiet, the system rests deeply. Deep rest does not fluctuate. It does not spike. It does not fade. It remains. As minutes extend, the body continues to be supported without effort. There is no sense of holding oneself upright. Gravity feels cooperative rather than demanding. The body is allowed to be exactly as it is. Allowance replaces control. Control belonged to pressure. As control fades, the mind releases its last subtle forms of commentary. There is nothing to comment on, nothing to evaluate, nothing to frame. Framing has ended. Psalm 27 speaks of confidence that exists without reference to outcome. This confidence does not look ahead or behind. It stands quietly in the present without needing to justify itself. Justification dissolves. Without justification, the inner world becomes light. Lightness here is not elevation, it is absence of load. The unseen weight that once followed you depended on being carried. Without anyone carrying it, it cannot remain. It does not fall, it does not break, it simply is no longer held. Unheld things disappear quietly. As the environment remains unchanged, the system no longer distinguishes between listening and resting. Both are the same, both support the same state. This merging is complete. As time continues, you may notice that even subtle impulses to stay with the words dissolve. The words no longer need attention to do their work. They exist as part of the environment, not as instructions. Instruction would imply movement. Movement has ended. As minutes pass, the experience does not thin, it does not lose depth. Depth remains because nothing interrupts it. Interruption was the only thing that ever reduced depth. Interruption is absent. The quiet remains intact. The refuge remains stable. Nothing new enters. Nothing old returns. This absence of return is not forced. It is natural. What no longer fits does not come back. As the duration continues, the inner world no longer checks whether this state will continue after the video ends. That question does not arise. Continuity has already been learned. Learning at this level is permanent. Permanent learning does not need reinforcement. It stays. Remain here. Allow the duration to continue reinforcing what has already stabilized. There is nothing to anticipate. There is nothing to conclude. There is nothing to prepare for. The refuge remains active. The quiet continues. And the state you are inhabiting continues to hold calmly, reliably, and without demand, as long as time itself is allowed to pass. As the environment remains unchanged, the inner world settles into something even quieter than familiarity. It settles into inevitability. Not inevitability as fate, but inevitability as stability. The sense that this state does not require effort to remain. When something is inevitable, the system stops negotiating with it. Negotiation dissolves. For a long time, negotiation may have existed silently in the background. Small adjustments, subtle checks, quiet internal movements meant to ensure safety or control. Here, those movements no longer arise. There is nothing to negotiate. The unseen pressure that once followed you depended on negotiation. It survived in the space where the system tried to balance rest with readiness. That space no longer exists. Psalm 91 describes protection as something that surrounds completely, leaving no need for internal management. When protection is complete, management becomes unnecessary. Management ends quietly. As time continues, the inner world no longer forms subtle expectations about itself. There is no sense of "I should feel this way" or "this should deepen." Expectations dissolve because there is nothing to expect. Expectation was a form of pressure. Without expectation, the experience becomes self-sustaining. Psalm 70 continues to support this by dissolving any internal sense of timing. There is no internal clock measuring progress or duration. The system no longer asks how long it has been here or how long it will remain. Time becomes neutral. Neutral time allows the deepest systems to disengage from effort entirely. As minutes extend, awareness no longer contracts around experience. It remains open, diffuse, and uncentered. There is no focal point demanding attention. Attention rests. When attention rests, the body follows. The body continues to release subtle layers of holding that may have gone unnoticed before. Not through action, but through absence of demand. Muscles remain relaxed without instruction. Breath remains steady without guidance. This steadiness does not reverse. Psalm 27 speaks of standing without fear, and fear here is not an emotion but a posture of readiness. That posture has dissolved. Standing remains, but without tension. Standing without tension is grounding. As the voice continues, it does not attempt to guide or stimulate. It remains present in the same way the environment remains present, quietly, reliably, without demand. This sameness allows the inner world to settle completely. As more time passes, even subtle impulses to monitor the experience dissolve. There is no sense of, am I still here, or is this working? Those questions belong to uncertainty. Uncertainty has ended. As the experience continues, the quiet becomes increasingly ordinary. It no longer feels special or noteworthy. This ordinariness is not loss of depth. It is confirmation that the state has been internalized. Internalized states do not call attention to themselves. They simply remain. The unseen weight that once followed you cannot return to ordinariness. It required disturbance to be felt. Disturbance does not occur here. As the duration continues, the environment remains exactly the same. No signals of transition, no cues of closure, no changes in tone or pace. This lack of signal allows the system to remain without bracing for what comes next. Nothing comes next. Remain here. Allow the continuity to continue doing what it does best, sustaining rest without interruption. There is nothing to finish. There is nothing to complete. There is nothing to prepare for. The refuge remains active, the quiet continues, and the state you are inhabiting continues to hold, steady, inevitable, and free from demand as time passes without resistance. As the quiet remains uninterrupted, the inner world reaches a place where even awareness feels optional. Not absent, but no longer necessary to maintain anything. The system does not depend on attention to remain settled. It rests because rest has become natural. Natural states do not require maintenance. Maintenance belonged to effort. Effort belonged to pressure. Pressure is no longer present. The unseen weight that once followed you relied on effort to stay relevant. It needed the system to hold something together, to manage, to compensate. Here, nothing is being held. Nothing is being managed. Release happens by omission. Psalm 91 speaks of remaining under protection without effort. Remaining does not require vigilance. It does not require intention. It happens because the environment itself is stable. Stability teaches the body more than instruction ever could. As time continues, the body rests deeply without drifting away. There is no collapse into sleep unless it is gentle and natural. There is no tension pulling awareness back. Everything is allowed to be exactly as it is. Allowance dissolves resistance. Resistance was the last trace of the old pressure. As resistance fades, the system no longer organizes itself around internal signals. Sensations arise and pass without interpretation. Thoughts arise and pass without narrative. Nothing lingers. Lingering required engagement. Engagement has ended. Psalm 70 continues to dissolve any sense that something is about to happen. The inner timeline is quiet. There is no soon and no later. Time is simply passing without demand. This timelessness allows the deepest rest. As the experience continues, awareness may feel wide and diffuse, not centered anywhere. This diffusion is not disorientation, it is expansion without effort. Safety allows awareness to spread. Spread awareness carries no pressure. Psalm 27 speaks of confidence that stands quietly without fear. Fear here is not an emotion, but a posture of readiness. That posture has dissolved. Standing remains without strain. Standing without strain is grounding. As minutes pass, the voice remains unchanged. The tone stays gentle, predictable, and neutral. This consistency signals safety more effectively than reassurance ever could. Reassurance implies doubt. Consistency removes it. As the duration continues, the experience no longer needs to be supported by the words. The words exist as part of the environment, not as guidance. The environment holds whether the words are noticed or not. This is integration. Integrated states do not require reminders. The unseen weight that once followed you cannot return to an integrated system. It depended on fragmentation. Fragmentation no longer exists. As time continues, the quiet feels increasingly ordinary. Ordinary does not mean shallow, it means stable. Stability does not announce itself, it simply remains. As minutes extend, there is no sense of nearing a conclusion, no internal shift signaling completion. This absence allows the system to remain without preparing for change. Preparation belongs to pressure. Without pressure, preparation dissolves. Remain here. Allow the continuity to continue doing its work beneath awareness. There is nothing to reach. There is nothing to resolve. There is nothing to end. The refuge remains active. The quiet continues, and the state you are inhabiting continues to hold calmly, steadily, and without demand as time moves on without resistance. As the continuity remains intact, the inner experience becomes increasingly quiet, not because something is being silenced, but because there is nothing left that needs to speak. The system no longer produces internal signals to guide itself. Guidance is unnecessary when alignment is stable. Alignment does not announce itself, it simply holds. The unseen pressure that once followed you relied on signals, subtle cues of urgency, quiet prompts to prepare, faint reminders to remain alert. Those signals no longer arise. Without signals, the pressure has no way to re-enter awareness. Psalm 91 describes a covering that does not fluctuate. It does not thin or strengthen. It remains consistent regardless of attention. As this consistency is mirrored internally, the system stops checking its surroundings. Checking has ended. As time continues, the body remains settled in a way that feels unremarkable. There is no sensation demanding notice, no tension calling for release. Everything feels neutral and safe. Neutrality here is not emptiness, it is equilibrium. Equilibrium allows the deepest layers of the nervous system to disengage fully. Disengagement does not mean withdrawal, it means rest without anticipation. Anticipation was pressure. Without anticipation, the inner world becomes spacious without effort. Psalm 70 continues to dissolve any remaining sense of something should happen. There is no unfolding event here. There is no sequence to follow. The experience is not moving toward anything. Movement has ended. As minutes extend, awareness may drift gently, sometimes closer to sleep, sometimes closer to quiet observation. Both states support the same process. The process does not depend on clarity, it depends on continuity. Continuity remains uninterrupted. As the voice continues, it remains steady, predictable, and unchanging. This sameness is intentional. It allows the system to remain settled without responding. Response is unnecessary. Psalm 27 speaks of confidence that stands without fear. Fear here is not emotion but orientation, an orientation toward disruption. That orientation has dissolved. Standing remains. Standing without tension feels grounded and natural. As time continues, the experience no longer feels like something you are inside of. It feels like something that is inside you. This inversion is subtle but important. The environment has been internalized. Internalized states do not fade when attention moves elsewhere. They remain as context. The unseen weight that once followed you cannot return to an internalized refuge. It cannot exist where safety is assumed rather than defended. As minutes pass, there is no sense of change, no sense of progress, no sense of completion. This absence allows the deepest stabilization to finalize itself without interference. Interference would require effort. Effort has dissolved. Remain here. Allow the duration to continue reinforcing what has already settled. There is nothing to conclude. There is nothing to prepare for. There is nothing to return to. The refuge remains active. The quiet continues, and the state you are inhabiting continues to hold. Steady, familiar, and free from demand as time passes without resistance. As the experience moves gently toward its final phase, nothing shifts abruptly. There is no transition to notice, no signal announcing that something is ending. Instead, what has been forming quietly now begins to settle into completeness. Completion here does not feel like an ending. It feels like sufficiency. Everything that needed to loosen has already loosened. Everything that needed to dissolve has already lost its structure. Nothing remains unresolved because nothing remains active. The unseen pressure that once followed you has no unfinished work here. It cannot return to complete a cycle. The cycle itself no longer exists, not because it was broken, but because it was outgrown. Outgrowing does not require confrontation. It requires stability. Stability has been present long enough now that the system no longer remembers what it felt like to carry tension as a baseline. What once felt familiar no longer feels relevant. This is how release becomes permanent. Psalm 91 does not describe a moment of rescue. It describes a condition that remains after danger is no longer organizing life. That condition has been internalized. Protection is no longer something you enter, it is something you carry without effort. Carrying protection does not feel heavy, it feels neutral. As this neutrality settles, the body no longer searches for signals. It no longer listens for disruption. It no longer prepares for pressure. Those reflexes have completed their work. Completion does not announce itself, it rests. Psalm 70 quietly reinforces that nothing is delayed and nothing is pending. There is no unfinished movement still unfolding beneath the surface. The sense of almost or not yet has dissolved. Everything that needed time has had it. As we move deeper into this closing phase, the inner world no longer needs support to remain settled. The environment has done its work. The state sustains itself without assistance. This is integration. Integration does not require reminders. It does not require reinforcement. It does not require repetition anymore. What remains is quiet certainty, not emotional, not declarative, but structural. The certainty that nothing unseen is pressing inward. The certainty that what once followed you does not have access anymore. Psalm 27 speaks of standing firm without fear. Fear here is not an emotion, but an orientation toward threat. That orientation has ended. Standing remains, relaxed, unguarded, and stable. Standing without fear does not feel powerful. It feels normal. Normal is the deepest victory. As the experience continues toward its close, the quiet does not thin. It does not fade. It does not resolve into something else. It simply continues as it is. This continuation is the seal. Nothing needs to be said to finalize it. Nothing needs to be done to secure it. What has changed is no longer changing. It has settled. As time passes now, the words exist only as a gentle frame, not as guidance. They do not lead forward. They do not point backward. They simply remain present while the state completes itself. Completion here is silent, and silence does not need a conclusion. The refuge remains active beyond the words. The stability remains beyond the video. The absence of pressure remains beyond this moment. Nothing is returning. Nothing is reopening. Nothing is unresolved. Remain where you are. Allow the final moments to pass exactly as the rest have, without expectation, without effort, without movement. What is settled stays settled, and what no longer belongs has already released its hold. The quiet holds, the refuge remains, and everything that needed to close has closed, gently, completely, and without resistance. As the final portion of this time unfolds, nothing new is introduced. What matters now is not movement, but confirmation through stillness. The environment that has been established does not weaken as words slow. It does not depend on narration to remain active. What holds now holds on its own. The inner world no longer needs reassurance that the pressure has ended. Reassurance belongs to doubt. Doubt no longer exists here. There is no question being asked internally, no uncertainty waiting for response. What once followed you does not leave a trace behind. It does not leave a gap, a memory, or a sensation that needs to be processed. It simply no longer participates in your inner space. This absence is complete. Psalm 91 speaks of dwelling, not departing. And dwelling does not end when attention moves elsewhere. It continues because it has become the new reference point. Protection is no longer something you enter during moments of need. It is the condition that remains when nothing is wrong. Nothing is wrong. Psalm 70 no longer needs to move anything forward. There is nothing left to arrive. Time has done its work. The process is not paused, not suspended, not temporary. It is finished because it no longer needs to continue. Finished does not mean gone. Finished means settled. Psalm 27 speaks of confidence that does not rise or fall. This confidence does not announce itself at the end. It does not require a final word. It stands quietly quietly, unchanged by silence. Silence now carries the state forward. As these final moments pass, the words become lighter, less necessary. They are not meant to be followed anymore. They simply exist while the experience closes itself naturally. There is nothing to remember from this. There is nothing to apply. There is nothing to repeat. What has shifted does not need maintenance. You do not need to return to this state. You do not need to recreate it. You do not need to protect it. It will remain because it has become normal. Normal is where pressure cannot survive. As the sound fades, the quiet does not. As attention moves elsewhere, the stability does not. As the video ends, nothing ends inside you. This is not a moment. This is an environment. And environments do not close, they continue. Remain exactly as you are. Nothing needs to follow this. Nothing needs to come next. What needed to release has released. What needed to remain has remained. The refuge is active beyond this time. The quiet is stable beyond these words. The pressure is gone beyond return. And you carry this forward without effort, without awareness, without intention, simply because it now belongs to you. Nothing more is required. Nothing more is needed. Everything is settled. As the last moments pass, there is no instruction left to give and no direction left to point toward. What has settled does not require continuation through words. It carries itself forward naturally, without effort or awareness. The quiet you are in does not belong to this recording. It does not depend on sound, pacing, or presence. It exists independently now. Nothing inside you is waiting. Nothing inside you is holding. Nothing inside you is preparing. The work that needed time has already had it. This state does not need to be revisited to remain real. It does not fade when attention shifts. It does not weaken when daily life resumes. It does not require protection or reinforcement. It remains because it has become familiar. Familiarity is the deepest form of permanence. As the voice comes to rest, nothing changes internally. The environment you are in does not close. It does not retreat. It does not dissolve. It stays exactly as it is, carrying forward into whatever follows this moment. There is no transition required, no adjustment needed, no awareness to maintain. You do not leave this state. You move within it. What once followed you does not follow anymore. It has no place to return to, no opening to re-enter, no relevance to reclaim. The absence you feel is complete, and completeness does not need a final word. Remain as you are. Let silence do what words no longer need to do. Nothing ends here. Nothing begins here. Everything simply continues, steady, quiet, and settled, exactly as it should. As the final silence settles, there is nothing left to sustain through words. What was active has completed its movement. What was dissolving has fully dissolved. What needed to stabilize has stabilized. Nothing remains open. This does not feel like an ending because nothing is being taken away. It feels like completion because nothing is asking to continue. The state no longer depends on time, sound, or guidance. It stands on its own. From this point forward, the experience no longer unfolds. It simply remains. It carries into rest, into sleep, into waking moments without needing to be recalled or protected. There is no signal to hold on to, no insight to remember, no feeling to recreate. What is real now does not require repetition. The quiet that holds you is not fragile. The stability that formed is not temporary. The absence of pressure is not conditional. Nothing returns, nothing reopens, nothing follows you forward. As the words end, the silence does not respond. It does not change. It does not close. It remains exactly as it is, uninterrupted and complete. You do not need to stay here. You do not need to leave here. This state moves with you naturally, without effort, without awareness. Everything that needed to end has ended. Everything that needed to remain has remained. There is nothing more to add.